Hello, I'm Steph from My Driver Classic, and today I'm showing you a car that's a wee bit older than some of the stuff that we've been looking at lately. It's this standard Flying 8 from 1939, so it's quite old compared to some of the stuff we've been out in recently. However, you might be looking at this and saying, Steph, usually you go and pick the shiny cars, but look, I picked this because I love the fact that it had all its history, it's not been mucked about with, and it's so incredibly original. It's got its entire life story written all over it, and I love that about the car. So in today's video, I'm going to show you around the outside, we're going to look under the bonnet, and we're even going to take it out on a short test drive. I'm really excited to show you this one today because I really do love my standards, and this has been on the list of dream drives for quite some time. So come on, let's go. How many cars could trace their history back, let alone a car from 1939? Well look, this particular car can, and I think that's rather special, because all the owners run far from new, and it's retained a large amount of originality, which the current owner is steadfast about keeping, and something which I wholly admire in today's world of over-restored, fussy, shiny cars that perhaps just don't get used much or even at all. Seem to just get trailered everywhere. Now the car, although wearing her age at first glance, has recently benefited from a sympathetic schedule of work. So it's had quite a lot done. It's had a chassis off resto, complete engine rebuild, and I'm talking everything right through to like the valve guides, absolutely everything. Lots of money spent. And if that wasn't enough, it's also had the suspension and the brakes fully overhauled. And it's so lovely to see somebody spend so much money on a car like this of this age and put so much love and care and attention into it. Now, the car currently resides in Yorkshire, and it was first registered to a lady residing in Scotland. Now, that's interesting in itself due to the low female ownership of vehicles at this time, especially from new, and she kept the car until 1966, and then it bounces through a few owners in the 60s until 69 when the car was taken off the road, and then it gets put into the Museum of Transport in Glasgow, and the museum kept it until 2016, and the current owner purchased it as only the 9th owner in 2019. Now, with these cars being so old, a lot of people don't fully appreciate what that flying badge means. Now, look, the flying range was a big deal for Standard in those post Second World War years, with flying standards really encompassing absolutely everything. They had a range of family-friendly cars to choose from. They came in kind of that mid-30s, 1935 mark, and really that boon was until the late 30s, so like 1939. Those were the kind of glory years for the flying standards. And that flying standard umbrella really encompassed everything. You had a choice of budget through to mid-range saloons, right through to fast, luxurious for the era cars. Really, that umbrella offered absolutely everything for everyone. And Standard were bold. They kept the range updated, looked at the competition, tried to stay ahead of the game, and they did it so well. And it might be, in fact, why we see that independent front suspension on this. But look, more of that later. Of the Flying 8, you'll notice that a lot of pre-war cars are called something rather like 8, 9, 10, and this is due to the taxation classes of the time, and this fell into the 8 horsepower bracket. It's calculated on the cylinder surface area, by the way, and we talked a lot about that in the Standard 9 and the Standard 10 videos if you want to go back and watch those and find out more about it. Now the engine, as I tell you later on, as well, is the 1021cc 4-cylinder engine, and it is a rear-wheel drive car, as you would expect. I've seen a couple of top speeds for this lovely car listed, and I've seen everything from the mid 50s to the low 60s, and a couple of people quoting 65 miles per hour, which sounds awfully like we'd be thrashing the poor thing, but it's good to point out that these aren't the slow coaches that many seem to think pre-war motors are. People seem to think you can only get up to about 30 miles an hour, but look, it's a load of nonsense. You can get a fair few miles out of these. It's also a pretty budget-friendly motor as well in terms of miles per gallon, because you can expect to get in excess of 40 miles per gallon when driven considerately. So I've seen everything quoted from 44 through to 48 miles per gallon. That's certainly not to be sniffed at. Now, although these were popular cars in the late 30s, by the time the war kicked into full swing and Standard's factories and workers were commandeered for war efforts, everything kind of changed. And those years leading into the mid-40s and how people's outlook changed throughout the war changed the appetite and the taste of the buying public. And bear in mind, you've got things like American cars swaying public opinion. There's a lot of things that change in those years. So you get to the end of the war, and what Standard do is they sadly drop that flying name, and the new cars that come in are very much derived from those pre-war cars, but they do feel a wee bit dated. So then what they do is Sir John Black comes in and he says, you know what, we're going to change all of this. He slashes all that to bits and he brings in the one model policy, and that, my friends, is where we get the Standard Vanguard. We've driven one of those before, borrowed one off my friend David early this year, and my goodness, what a lovely car that was. Preferred that a lot to many of the other cars that we've tested this year. And that is a very brief overview. But look, what's it like to drive and what's it like on the open road? Well, hop in and we'll get going. My goodness, this is certainly a step back in time. And if you remember those Standard 9s and the Standard 10 that we tested, oh goodness, I think it was about 2020, Roger's cars. Absolutely adore Roger and I adore his cars. And this gives me really great memories of that fun day we had filming, because this dash layout feels incredibly similar to that. Well, of course, they're all standards, you would expect it to be. However, those were about 10 years older. Anyway, coming inside here, I think personally you have got an awful lot going on for a 30s car, because we look at stuff like the Morris Minor in the 60s that we recently looked at, and you'll remember that we only really had the Speedo. The Speedo as standard, that was pretty much it, in the fuel gauge. Whereas we get in this, we've got oil pressure gauge, we've got amp meter, you've got petrol gauge, you've got your Speedo, you've got your mileometer. There's quite a lot going on across those two gauges. So for a car of the late 30s, I'm relatively impressed. Now coming away from that, you've got your, again, very similar to that, I think they do it on the Austin as well, but it's definitely on the Standard. So just around your key, you've got your lights. Do you see that? And then this has just reminded me as well, this button up here, this is for your panel lights. They're actually remarkably good for a bit of daytime lighting. And then over on the left here, you've got your pull start. So essentially when we start the car, as you'll see in a minute, we turn this key, we pull that starts the vehicle. You've got your choke over on the right hand side here. And then you've got your windscreen wiper here, and I say windscreen wiper because you get one, and this is pretty standard for the era. And in fact, some vehicles all the way through to the 50s only have one wiper as standard. People are willing to get away with a lot less. Now this is quite a fiddly process, so let me try and show you it. Essentially what it does, there we go, you essentially have to lift that and place it on the screen and it starts the mechanism. And then to get it off, it's quite fiddly. So you push it in, you take it down and you park it like that. Worlds away from our switches today where we can just switch things on or automatically detect that there's water on the screen. But yes, that's all our controls. You've got a very small glove box parcel shelf area to your left, and over to your right hand side as well. And you've got an umbrella handbrake just down here. And that is everything you've got. But you know what, as you'll see when we go for our very short test drive today, you don't really need too much more. And as well as that, we have got this sunroof up here. This is original and it was in all of them. I believe, and I've heard this from a couple of people now, that these were put in to save steel and to kind of reduce the body weight. So this was always standard. Again, really nice feature now, but standard for the time, it's just great. Standard didn't make rubbish cars. And if you're wondering what this went up against, by the way, because this was essentially their contender for that 8 horsepower category, it went up against, I think, the Austin 8 and the Morris 8. Again, very nice cars, all in their own right. But this for me, I don't know if it's the dash, I don't know if it's the colour, but it's a really lovely car. Now, one of the things that I will say is we touched briefly upon the car's history when we were having a look round, but the thing that I love about this car especially is that nobody has retrimmed it. So it's exactly as it was. in 1939 spec. It's not been modernised. Yes, some of the leather has started to degrade, but it's lovely that it's been kept all painstakingly original, even with its faults. I think that's a really special quality in a car when everybody seems to be racing to just restore everything and remove its history. So before I start this up, I just thought I'd give you a few basic facts. We have 3 forward gears on this, no synchro on first, and apparently synchro on second is a wee bit iffy. It's the 1021cc engine, giving us, I think, 31 brake horsepower in this. So again, you've got enough power to be keeping up for like round town, little trips and stuff like that. People look at stuff like this and they think it's going to be a snail of a vehicle, but actually sometimes they're deceptively nippy. But I've not actually driven it yet, so should we go and have a look and see how it performs? Let's get it started up. Check we're in neutral. Gonna give her a wee bit more choke. Be a fine art getting the choke right on a car you don't own. Have a little listen from the bag and then we'll go out on a drive. Right, let's go on an adventure. Truth be told, I am really struggling with this gearbox. So I'm going to feel my way in. And this is why we're on a bit of a private road. There we go. And that's us up into second. You have to be really careful because second is really close to reverse on this. But it soon lets you know because it starts crunching if you try and get into reverse. Now as you come along, I just wanted to tell you that we are on cable brakes on this. Now if you've never seen cable brakes in action before, I'm going to try and brake and show you it whilst we've got a clear road. But you'll see that it doesn't finish up like you might finish up in your modern car. Look, it's a little bit slower. So what does that mean? Well, a lot of people would go, well, that means that I'm never going to drive it. But actually it just means that you adapt your driving style. A little bit like I was talking about with those drum brakes the other week. The other thing that I should probably mention is this was the first of the 8 horsepower cars to have independent front suspension. Another little fact as we come along. Now that's us up into 3rd gear. But as you can see here, we're pootling along. And one of the things that really strikes me is that to say that this car is from 1939, yes, that gearbox is taking a bit to get used to and it is harder work than some of your 50s and 60s cars. But I'll tell you what, the ride on this is better, if not comparable, to stuff that's 20, 30 years newer. And you find this time and time again with standards. They were all made really well. And I don't think I've ever got in one and thought, this is a poorly constructed vehicle. Unlike some of the other British marques that you could name that were still producing cars through to the 60s and 70s. As you can probably see here, the steering is a little bit less precise than some of the other stuff that we've taken out. But goodness me, the car's from 1939. You don't expect it to be comparable with something much, much newer. Hey, as Ian and Carly once told me from Pub Nut, chaos is content. And unfortunately, this is slight chaos today because this lovely standard has decided that she doesn't actually want to do a test drive today, and who can blame her, because the weather's rubbish, it's freezing cold, and I think she'd rather be at her garage at home. So she's given up the Ghost, and if you're wondering what's happened, it looks like it might be ignition related or something like that, just because of the way that she's misfiring. My Morris Minor did it a while ago when the coil was going and the Triumph, so I was like, could it be that? But remember, this is on 6-volt electric, so we're not playing exactly the same games as we do with some of the stuff that I drive. Anyway, I'm not going to just end the test there. I wanted to kind of sum it up for you really. So let's walk through all the elements. First of all, lovely and easy to steer, really light, so much lighter than you might be expecting. On par really with that 50s and 60s stuff. It didn't move massively on in terms of things getting lighter. Changing a gear, as you probably saw, I found that quite difficult. But you know what? I think an exuberant afternoon exploring country lanes, I could probably get my head into the swing of things. Now, if you're looking at something like this and you're watching this video, don't be deterred by the hard gear change or the stop by the side of the road, because the standard community is absolutely fantastic, and standards are really good fun to drive overall. I've never got in one that I don't like. And the club as well is really good, so if you ever need some help or expertise, they are such a friendly bunch. As I said in that recent standard video that I did when I did the 8, the more modern one, I was talking about how everybody that I've ever met is so lovely, and they really are. It's a great club, great community, and they're great cars. She just had a slight hiccup today. We all do it. I imagine if I was born in 1939, and I was being dragged out on a cold, wet day, I wouldn't be too happy either. So that's it from me today. I've really enjoyed showing you the car. I've enjoyed sharing a bit of British pre-war motoring history with you. And until next time, when hopefully we get to the end of the test, take care and drive safely.